Hey, welcome to CryptoCoach365, day 96. Kind of exciting times we're living in. Unfortunately, it's bad kind of exciting for quite a lot of people. Bit of news on cryptocurrency today. Venezuela, or specifically Maduro, just announced that he will devalue their currency by 95% and peg the new currency to a cryptocurrency that Venezuela has created. Sounds like kind of a good idea on its surface, but unfortunately, quite a lot of problems with that whole plan, and there's a lot of problems with the rest of it as well. Excuse me. So when he devalues, he says he's going to devalue the currency by 95%. Really, that just brings it in line with the black market value of it, which is technically the actual value that the currency is worth. But the problem is that this thing he's pegging it to. Venezuela came up with a cryptocurrency that they have called the Petro, which is directly linked to the price of the petroleum oil. Unfortunately, if you want to peg a value of a currency to a commodity, it's not really a cryptocurrency per se at that point. You still need a third party to actually control, I guess, the exchange rate and also the issuance of it. I mean, value of everything is based on supply and demand. So if you simply say that I will only trade this currency for the equivalent of, let's say, 1/60th of a barrel of oil, if there is too much supply or too little supply, other markets will pop in and start arbitraging because the actual value of the currency will be different than what you're exchanging it for. So in order to actually peg something to the value of something else, you actually need to be able to print more currency and destroy currency to adjust its price to match other things. Unfortunately, governments have had a reluctance to destroy their own currency to do this before, and that's partly why we ended up having to everybody had to abandon the gold standard, because we were happy to print more currency when gold prices went up or went down, but we never actually destroyed it to bring the currency value back up. So there's one problem. The other problem is that this currency will be linked to, well, the new sovereign bolivar is what they're calling it, will be linked to this cryptocurrency, the Petro, which doesn't make much sense, because you might as well just use the Petro itself directly. I mean, maybe they're going to be, it's for convenience sake so they can use papers, but then you can just issue paper called the Petro, with each paper being backed one-to-one by this cryptocurrency. And again, you have the issue of a third party doing the backing. The whole thing with Venezuela having hyperinflation was because initially the bolivar was backed one-to-one to a dollar, but the government totally failed to maintain that. And now the government is promising that this time they will actually maintain the peg to the Petro, which, I mean, I'm sure anybody who's living there is not going to believe them at this point. And finally, the other issue is that they are going to, the new sovereign bolivar is pegged to the Petro, which is pegged to oil, so you have a double peg there. But oil isn't exactly stable. Like, the whole reason Venezuela ended up crashing so hard, I mean, the reason why it crashed was because it had a very socialist economy that was entirely based on petroleum, and petroleum paying for all their socialist programs. But the thing that started to make it crash was the oil prices falling, and oil is not stable. It goes up, it goes down. There's a lot of speculation in it. So that basically means that anybody who uses Petro will be subject to oil currency fluctuations. Their currency will go up and down depending on the oil market, and it puts the country in an extreme risk if the country ends up, let's say, promising a lot of social programs and payments and other kind of government expenditures, and all of a sudden the oil market crashes and now they actually can't pay for it. So yeah, that's just a lot of mistakes. And then on top of that, what he also promised, Maduro, Venezuela's president, is that he will raise luxury taxes. He will impose a financial transaction tax, so now it'll actually cost a little money to send large amounts of money. He will raise the minimum wage, which price controls is the last thing Venezuela needs at this point, because price controls are one of the biggest reasons that it crashed as it did. And will decrease prices for gasoline and set gasoline prices to subsidize gasoline prices for people. So again, this is a government that ran into massive debt, which causes massive inflation, and now they're going to say they're going to pay for gasoline too. So all kinds of mistakes that Venezuela is doing right now, because the guy running it, he was a bus driver that got elected on populist promises of free stuff, and people believed him, and now he doesn't know what the hell he's doing. Really unfortunate for people who live there. Congratulations, though, to Venezuela for setting the record for inflation, hyperinflation in currency. They actually beat out Weimar Republic, which was the hyperinflation that happened in Germany before Hitler came to power. Back where you may see some old black and white pictures where people would go grocery shopping while carting literally wheelbarrows worth of money. So IMF is estimating that this year, either this year or next year, Venezuela's inflation rate should hit about 1,000,000%, which is just a ridiculous number. I mean, usually you hear like 22% was what happened under Chavez a while ago. Or you might even hear 100, and I think in Russia at one point it hit 800, but like 1,000,000%. Like right now I think it's over 100,000%, which is nuts. Like basically the currency is crashing so fast that by the time you take it out of your pocket, it's already worthless. It's horrible. So yeah, really, on one hand, really terrible for the people living there, and it does seem interesting, at least, that there's a country that's going to go off of the US dollar standard, which is what countries around the world use, onto their own new cryptocurrency standard. So I mean, that alone is kind of an interesting little twist, where one country is going to try to become entirely independent and use their own crypto peg. But unfortunately, it's done by a government that like nobody really trusts at this point, and it's definitely not going to last. On the other hand, it is kind of another benefit or boost, at least, for Bitcoin's image, because Venezuelans have been using Bitcoin a lot. That's the only way to send money to family in Venezuela and know that it's actually going to get there. There's a lot of businesses, hotels, and other places that actually accept Bitcoin because it's a currency that works and holds its value. There's been a massive amount of investing in Bitcoin in Venezuela because, you know, Bitcoin is a hard, stable currency unlike their own. And globally, it just creates another example of why government currencies are not really to be trusted, because they work until they don't, because governments will keep printing them until they can't anymore. So anyway, again, it's really unfortunate what's going on in Venezuela right now. That whole country has been basically following the Soviet, the Soviet rule book on how to totally screw up the country and the populace. But like I said, at least we have another example of why cryptocurrencies make sense and why eventually they'll probably take over, because what happened in Venezuela, unfortunately, is something that almost every other country is very slowly, in most cases, is following in footsteps of, which is you make a lot of expenditures, you make a lot of promises, you never cut back on those promises when you run out of money, and eventually you start having to borrow more and more to pay for those promises until your debt gets to a point where you can't sustain it, and then the whole house of cards come crashing down. So at that point your option is either the currency gets devalued where they cut off a bunch of zeros, or I guess somebody tries to issue a new currency, like USSR after it crashed. Russia issued a new ruble like 2 times, maybe 3 times afterwards. Or people are smart, get smart, they stop trusting their government and they switch to a stable, much more reliable and trustworthy currency like Bitcoin. So anyway, yeah, weird this news came out on a Sunday, but there you go. So, and regarding my own stuff, it's a weekend. I just did a bunch of little maintenance stuff, a little bit of moving, continuing to work on spreadsheets and minor paperwork type stuff. So not really much to do, or much that happened in my own, I guess, personal life. But you know, it's the weekend. Entrepreneurs, they work on weekends, but because the rest of the world doesn't work, sometimes you kind of end up having to take a little bit of a break and not work on too many things yourself either. So anyway, that's it for today, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye.